Most women have been taught, often without a single word spoken, that their survival depends on swallowing their truth. From childhood, they learned to smile when their spirit burned, to agree when their body screamed no, to keep the peace even when the peace was nothing more than a polished lie. And so over time, they began silencing the voice that was once wild and alive. That voice, the raw feminine truth, became buried under layers of politeness, compliance, and the quiet terror of rejection. This is not kindness. This is self-betrayal disguised as virtue. It is the slow erosion of a woman's own essence, the trading of her soul for temporary belonging. And the cruelest part is that the world often praises her for it, calling her selfless while she withers inside. There is an ancient pattern at work here. Jung might call it the shadow, the exiled part of the psyche that holds everything we've been told is unacceptable. In the feminine, that shadow often holds rage, instinct, desire, and intuitive knowing. It is the high priestess locked in the tower, her eyes blindfolded, her mouth sewn shut by years of unspoken compromise. The more a woman fears losing love, the more she reinforces her own cage. And the men who claim to adore her often love her silence more than her truth, for her silence demands nothing, disrupts nothing, threatens nothing. But the silenced voice doesn't vanish. It turns inward where it begins to whisper in corrosive ways. A woman who betrays her truth begins to feel a strange emptiness, as if her life is happening at a distance. She may become restless, anxious, or numb. She overthinks every choice, waiting for permission that never comes. She overfunctions in relationships, pouring into others while starving herself. She begins to believe that her worth depends entirely on how little she needs, how agreeable she can be, how perfectly she can read the moods of others. This is the slow death of the authentic self, not a sudden collapse, but a quiet, daily surrender. The Stoics taught that what we fear controls us. For the silenced woman, fear of abandonment is the tyrant. She imagines that if she speaks her truth, she will be left, judged, or punished. And perhaps in the short term she will be. But the deeper truth is that every time she censors herself to keep love, she confirms the very belief that she is only lovable when small. The cost is her sovereignty. And sovereignty, once given away, is not easily reclaimed. It requires a fierce reckoning with the part of herself she's been taught to hide. This reckoning is not gentle. It begins when the pressure of self-denial becomes unbearable, when the need to breathe outweighs the need to be approved of. It is the moment a woman stops asking, "Will they still love me if I say this?" and begins asking, "Will I still love myself if I do?" In that shift, the shadow begins to awaken. The voice that was silenced returns, not as a polite whisper, but as a clear and unapologetic truth. And here is the paradox. The moment she risks losing others by speaking, she begins to gain herself. But understand this, the first time she speaks, the ground may shake. Those who benefited from her silence may resist, guilt her, or even withdraw. This is where most women falter, retreating back into compliance. They mistake the discomfort of others for proof that they are wrong. In reality, it is proof that their voice has power. The feminine voice is not always soft. Sometimes it is the storm that clears the path. Sometimes it is the stillness that refuses to move. And in both cases, it is holy. The high priestess within her does not shout to be heard. She speaks because her voice is an altar, and every word laid upon it is sacred. But to reach this place, a woman must stop betraying herself in subtle, daily ways. She must notice every time she says, "It's fine," when it isn't. Every time she swallows a no out of fear. Every time she praises someone for treating her with the bare minimum of decency. She must choose, again and again, to be loyal to her inner truth, even when her voice trembles, even when the room grows cold. And here lies the deeper question. What happens when a woman no longer fears the silence of others more than she fears silencing herself? What happens when she chooses the weight of her own voice over the comfort of being liked? The answer is not a fantasy of constant applause. It is something quieter, more enduring. It is the unshakable knowledge that she belongs to herself. And in that belonging, every word she speaks becomes a thread in the tapestry of her liberation. But this awakening is only the first fracture in the old structure. The real transformation comes when she sees how deeply the habit of self-betrayal has shaped her choices in love, work, and even how she walks through the world. This is the part most avoided, because it reveals just how much has been lost in the name of keeping peace. What if those losses were not accidents, but the inevitable cost of living in exile from her own truth? The moment a woman sees the architecture of her own self-betrayal, she begins to realize it is not random. It has a blueprint. It was built over years, sometimes generations, by women before her who were taught that safety meant silence. She inherits not only their resilience but also their compromises, carrying unspoken instructions in her bones. Do not outshine, do not confront, do not disturb. These unwritten rules become an invisible script, guiding her interactions without her consent. She finds herself playing roles she never consciously auditioned for: the peacemaker, the nurturer, the woman who always understands, never demands. This is how the feminine voice is muted, not through one dramatic betrayal but through 1,000 small ones. She learns to say yes when she means no. She learns to nod while her inner world screams. She learns to thank those who give her scraps, mistaking crumbs for feasts. And in this repetition, her instincts become clouded. She starts to question whether her feelings are valid at all, or whether she is simply too sensitive. The silenced woman becomes an expert in self-editing, stripping her sentences of anything that might cause ripples. She polishes her tone, rehearses her words, shrinks her truth until it fits into the narrowest possible frame. In Jungian terms, this is the disowned anima, the life force of her inner world reduced to something ornamental. The anima, in its full power, is wild and ungovernable, moving between tenderness and ferocity with grace. But when suppressed, it becomes distorted. It turns into passive aggression, covert resentment, or a haunting numbness that no amount of external success can soothe. A woman disconnected from her anima becomes a ghost in her own life, existing in form but absent in essence. The Stoics would warn her, the chains that bind you are not only forged by others but by your own repeated consent. Every time she silences herself to avoid discomfort, she tightens those chains. And here is the tragedy: she often mistakes this bondage for strength. She calls it patience, grace, adaptability. But patience without boundaries is not a virtue, it is an erasure. Adaptability without self-respect is not resilience, it is surrender. There comes a moment, however, when the cost of this surrender can no longer be ignored. It arrives as a deep fatigue, the kind that no amount of rest can touch. It arrives in the form of relationships that drain rather than nourish, in the dull ache of knowing she has more to give the world than she has ever allowed herself to express. This moment is dangerous because it demands she face the truth. No one is coming to grant her permission. The door back to her own voice must be unlocked from the inside. The high priestess archetype knows this. She does not wait for approval to speak. She speaks because her truth is the compass of her existence. She knows that the feminine voice is not always meant to be agreeable. Sometimes it is meant to disrupt the comfortable lies that keep everyone asleep. And yet, reclaiming this voice is not simply about speaking louder. It is about speaking from the rooted place within that cannot be swayed by the reactions of others. It is about recognizing that every time she silences herself to keep a connection, she is abandoning the most important connection she will ever have, the one with her own soul. To reclaim her voice, she must begin in the smallest moments. She must notice when she says, "I don't mind," but does. She must allow herself to speak a no without softening it into a maybe. She must stop apologizing for existing, for taking up space, for having a need that others may not want to meet. This reclamation is not about aggression. It is about alignment. It is the choice to be unshakably loyal to her own truth, even when that truth is inconvenient, even when it changes the dynamics she has relied on for years. And here is the paradox. As she begins to honor her truth, some connections will dissolve. The people who depended on her silence will feel threatened by her presence. They may withdraw, criticize, or attempt to shame her back into compliance. This is not proof that she is wrong. It is proof that she has stepped out of the role they needed her to play. What remains, however, will be different. The relationships that survive will be those rooted in authenticity rather than performance. Still, there is a deeper layer, yet the part of her that fears what will happen when the voice she has buried begins to speak truths she is not ready to hear. This voice will not only call out others, it will call out her own complicity. It will ask her to account for the years she has stayed small. It will demand that she stop waiting to feel ready and begin living as though her worth is non-negotiable. And this, perhaps, is the most terrifying demand of all. If she obeys this voice, she will never again be able to unhear it. Her life will no longer fit neatly into the expectations that once held her. She will walk differently, choose differently, love differently. And while this will cost her the comfort of the old script, it will grant her something far more valuable, the unshakable peace that comes from never abandoning herself again. But the question remains, when the voice within finally rises, will she have the courage to follow it into the unknown? When the voice within begins to rise, it does not come politely. It does not ask if she is ready. It floods through her like a truth too long restrained, demanding to be lived. At first, it may feel like rebellion, sharp, urgent, impossible to ignore. But this is not mere defiance. It is the reawakening of a part of her that was never meant to be tamed. This voice does not seek permission because it remembers a time before she was taught she needed any. It remembers when her instincts were her compass, and her boundaries were not negotiable. Yet awakening this voice is not without consequence. For years, she has built her relationships, her work, even her identity around being agreeable. When she begins to speak in alignment with her truth, it is as if she is removing one stone after another from a wall that others have leaned on for stability. Some will feel betrayed, claiming she has changed. In reality, she is simply no longer performing the role they wrote for her. This can leave her standing in the disorienting space between who she was and who she is becoming, where neither the old world nor the new has fully taken form. In Jungian language, this is the confrontation with the shadow. The shadow is not only the unexpressed anger or grief she has hidden, it is also the raw power and clarity she has avoided, because owning it would mean dismantling the parts of her life built on self-abandonment. The shadow does not care for politeness. It cares for truth. And when integrated, it does not destroy her humanity, it deepens it. She becomes more whole, more rooted, more unwilling to betray herself in exchange for temporary harmony. The Stoics would see this as the practice of living in accordance with nature, the nature of her own being, which cannot thrive when suppressed. They would tell her that freedom lies not in controlling the reactions of others, but in aligning her actions with her principles, regardless of consequence. This is not about seeking conflict, but about refusing to participate in her own diminishment. Every time she chooses her truth over her fear, she sharpens the edge of her own sovereignty. The high priestess archetype within her does not shout to prove her worth. She does not bargain with her truth. She speaks with the quiet authority of one who knows that her voice is not a tool for approval but a vessel for wisdom. And in this space, she discovers a new form of power, one that does not require dominance or submission, but stands immovable in its own center. Others may try to sway her with guilt, flattery, or threat, but her compass no longer points toward their comfort. It points toward her own alignment. Still, the path is not linear. There will be moments when old habits rise, when the temptation to self-censor is strong, when silence seems safer than truth. These moments are not failures, they are reminders. They show her where the roots of self-betrayal still run deep, and each time she notices, she has the chance to choose differently, to speak the uncomfortable truth instead of smoothing it over, to say no without cushioning it with an apology, to remain present when someone disapproves, without rushing to make it right. There is a profound alchemy in this process. The very fears that once silenced her begin to lose their hold. She realizes that being disliked is survivable, that conflict is not fatal, that the people who truly value her will not require her to amputate parts of herself to earn their love. And with each step, her voice grows clearer, not because it is louder, but because it is truer. But here lies the deeper transformation. Her voice is no longer just for her. It becomes a signal, a beacon to other women still caught in the quiet suffocation of self-betrayal. Without preaching, without demanding, she becomes living proof that it is possible to speak without losing oneself, to stand firm without becoming hardened, to belong to oneself without needing permission from the world. And yet, there is still one final threshold she must cross. It is not enough to speak her truth in moments of high emotion or crisis. The true reclamation is when her voice becomes an everyday act, when her smallest decisions, her casual conversations, her boundaries in the mundane are all aligned with her inner compass. This is when her voice is no longer a performance or an act of bravery, but simply the natural expression of who she is. To reach this, she must release the last illusion, the hope that there will be a moment when using her voice no longer costs her anything. The truth is, it will always cost something: comfort, approval, predictability. But what it gives in return is worth infinitely more, the peace of knowing that she will never again be a stranger to herself. So the question becomes, when faced with the choice between comfort and truth, between belonging to others and belonging to herself, which will she choose when there is no applause, no validation, no one watching? The turning point comes quietly, often without fanfare. There is no grand ceremony, no dramatic proclamation, only a subtle but irreversible shift. One day, she notices that she no longer hesitates before speaking. The internal negotiation that once stole her voice, the endless weighing of whether she will be liked, understood, or approved of, has grown faint. She still feels the tremors of fear, but they no longer dictate her choice. It is as if the ground beneath her has grown roots, anchoring her in a way that no external validation ever could. Yet this shift is not simply about speaking. It is about speaking from the right place. Before, when she found the courage to use her voice, it often emerged edged with resentment or defense, sharpened by years of suppression. Now it carries a different quality, a calm, grounded clarity that does not need to prove itself. This is the voice of a woman who has faced her own shadow and chosen to integrate rather than exile it. It is not loud, but it is undeniable. Jung would say she has begun the work of individuation, the process of becoming whole by uniting the conscious and unconscious parts of herself. In this state, her feminine voice is no longer a weapon nor a performance. It is the natural language of her being. She no longer edits herself to avoid discomfort, nor does she speak solely to provoke. Her words are an extension of her inner alignment, carrying the weight of authenticity. The Stoics might observe that she now embodies the discipline of living in harmony with her own nature. She has stopped outsourcing her moral compass to the expectations of others. She has accepted that external circumstances, the opinions, reactions, and judgments of people, are beyond her control. What is within her control is her choice to remain loyal to her truth. And in this loyalty, she discovers a strange freedom. The fear of rejection loses its teeth when she no longer seeks to belong in places that require her silence. The high priestess within her has fully emerged now, not as a mystical idea but as a living presence. She does not demand recognition, yet people sense her. There is an unspoken authority in the way she carries herself, a subtle signal that she will not be swayed from her center. She has nothing to sell, nothing to prove, and nothing to hide. Her truth is not a performance for applause. It is the quiet law by which she lives. Still, the world does not suddenly bend to her clarity. There will always be those who resist her boundaries, who misinterpret her self-possession as arrogance, who long for the version of her that was easier to influence. But she no longer takes these reactions as evidence that she is wrong. She understands now that resistance is not always a sign to yield. Sometimes it is confirmation that she has stepped into her rightful place. In the day-to-day, this reclamation is revealed in small moments. She declines invitations without apology when her body needs rest. She says yes only when she means it. She addresses hurt directly rather than burying it beneath forced smiles. She does not over-explain her choices to make others comfortable. These may seem like small acts, but they are the foundation of a life that is no longer built on self-abandonment. The deeper change, however, is internal. Where once there was a constant background hum of anxiety, the need to monitor, adjust, and appease, there is now a steady sense of self. She is no longer performing for acceptance, which means she can finally experience connection as it is meant to be. A meeting of two whole beings, not a transaction of approval for compliance. There is also a newfound spaciousness in her mind. Without the exhausting task of constantly silencing her inner voice, she has energy for creation, for vision, for pursuits that once felt out of reach. She begins to notice that the more she honors her truth, the more her life aligns with what actually fulfills her, rather than what merely keeps her safe. And yet there is a truth she must face. The work is never truly finished. There will always be moments when the old patterns whisper, tempting her to retreat into the comfort of silence. There will always be situations that challenge her courage. But the difference now is that she trusts herself to respond. She knows the way back to her voice, even when fear tries to pull her away from it. In the end, the feminine voice she has reclaimed is not just for speaking, it is for living. Ever. Why choice, every boundary, every act of self-respect becomes an expression of it. And through living this way, she not only frees herself, but she becomes a mirror for others, showing them what is possible when a woman refuses to betray herself. So the question lingers, pulsing quietly beneath the surface. When the moment comes again, and it will, to either silence her truth or speak it, will she recognize that this choice is not about that single moment, but about the kind of life she is building with every word she utters? There comes a moment when she realizes that reclaiming her voice is not an act she performs occasionally, but a way of existing that shapes every part of her reality. The air feels different when she speaks from a place of inner alignment. Her words no longer rush out as if she must prove their worth before anyone can take them seriously. Instead, they arrive with measured certainty, as though they belong in the space they occupy. This is not arrogance. It is the quiet authority of self-ownership, the calm of someone who no longer seeks permission to be who she is. In this stage, she begins to notice the subtler forms of self-betrayal that once went undetected. The polite agreement she gives to avoid an awkward pause. The laughter she forces when a comment cuts deep. The moment she plays small to avoid overshadowing someone else. These habits, though seemingly harmless, are the cracks where her power used to leak away. Now, she seals them with awareness. She learns to let silence stand when she disagrees, to meet discomfort without softening her truth, to inhabit her full presence without apology. Jung would recognize this as the deepening of individuation, not merely integrating the shadow, but living from the integrated self every day. The difference between the woman she was and the woman she is now lies in her refusal to negotiate with her own truth. She has stopped treating it as something to barter for love, stability, or acceptance. Instead, it has become the foundation on which everything else in her life is built. The Stoics would call this the art of living deliberately. She no longer reacts out of habit or fear. She pauses, considers, and chooses her responses according to what serves her principles, not what appeases others. This deliberate living frees her from the chaos of chasing external control. She no longer needs to manipulate outcomes to feel safe. Her safety comes from knowing she will not abandon herself, no matter the cost. The high priestess within her has now shed the last of her bindings. Her voice has become not just a tool for self-expression, but an instrument of discernment. She uses it not to fill silence, but to illuminate truth in herself and in others. Those who hear her may feel seen in ways they are not ready for, because her voice calls forth authenticity in everyone it touches. And yet, she does not wield it carelessly. She understands that truth without compassion can wound as deeply as a lie, and so she tempers clarity with presence. With this voice, she moves differently through the world. She no longer chases opportunities or people who require her to shrink. She is drawn instead to what resonates with her essence, what allows her to expand without losing herself. Relationships shift, conversations deepen, work takes on new meaning. The fabric of her life begins to match the texture of her inner world, and in that alignment she finds a sense of belonging that is unshakable because it is rooted in herself. But there is a deeper magic unfolding, the realization that this transformation is not just personal but ancestral. Every time she speaks a truth her mother could not, every time she refuses the silence that smothered her grandmothers, she alters the pattern for the women who will come after her. She is not only reclaiming her own voice, she is restoring a lineage of voices that were muted by fear, control, and survival. Her courage becomes their liberation. This awareness changes how she carries her power. She is no longer reckless with it, nor does she hoard it. She embodies it, knowing that every act of self-loyalty ripples outward. Other women will see her standing unapologetically in her truth and feel something stir in themselves, the recognition of a possibility they had not dared to imagine. She does not need to preach to inspire. Her very being becomes the sermon. Still, the path requires vigilance. Power is not something gained once and held forever. It must be lived daily, chosen repeatedly, especially in the moments when fear creeps in dressed as reason. There will be days when her voice trembles, when her old patterns feel safer than her new truth. But now she understands that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear decide. And so the question shifts. It is no longer will she speak. It becomes, will she live every moment as though her truth is the most sacred thing she owns? Because if she will, then nothing and no one can take her voice from her again. Not through threat, not through rejection, not even through love that asks her to be less than she is. There is a quiet strength that settles in when a woman no longer bargains with her truth. It is not the brittle armor of defensiveness, nor the sharp edge of perpetual confrontation. It is something steadier, a grounded certainty that radiates without effort. She does not need to announce it, because it lives in the way she moves, in the way she listens, in the way she speaks only when her words align with the deepest layers of her being. This is the full flowering of the voice she once buried. Now she begins to notice a reversal. Where once she shaped herself to fit the spaces offered to her, now the spaces she inhabits begin to shape themselves around her authenticity. Opportunities emerge that align with her values. People who respect her boundaries seek her out. The chaotic pull toward those who diminish her fades, replaced by a magnetic draw toward relationships that nourish her spirit. This is not magic. It is the natural outcome of living in alignment, of making herself available only to what meets her at the level she meets herself. Jung would see in this the archetype of the self, the point where all aspects of the psyche converge into wholeness. She is no longer at war with her instincts, no longer ashamed of her needs, no longer performing a fragmented version of herself. Her feminine voice is no longer just sound. It is the outward expression of this inner wholeness. Every yes she speaks now is alive with commitment. Every no is a declaration of self-respect. The Stoics would say she has mastered the most difficult art, to live by principle, not by impulse or fear. She understands that life will still bring rejection, loss, and discomfort, but none of these are worth the price of betraying herself. She does not waste energy trying to control the uncontrollable. She directs it instead toward living with integrity, moment by moment. This creates a kind of unshakable peace, not the peace of avoidance, but the peace of alignment. The high priestess within her now holds her place without wavering. She does not need to raise her voice to be heard. The clarity of her presence speaks for her. She no longer asks, "Will they accept me?" but rather, "Does this honor who I am becoming?" And this shift is everything. It redefines what love means, what connection means, what success means. She is no longer measuring her life by how much she can endure, but by how much of herself she can bring into every experience without dilution. There is a power in this that others can feel, even if they cannot name it. Some will be drawn to it, sensing its authenticity. Others will be unsettled by it, because it disrupts the unspoken agreements that keep people in roles. Yet she does not bend herself to manage their comfort. Her voice, now steady and rooted, is not a tool for control but a testament to her sovereignty. She trusts that what is meant to remain will remain, and what is meant to fall away will do so without her forcing or chasing. And as she lives this way, she begins to understand something profound. The feminine voice is not only about self-expression. It is about self-trust. Speaking her truth would mean little if she did not also live in a way that proves she trusts herself to handle the consequences. The power lies not in the words alone, but in the unwavering commitment to stand behind them, even when they cost her comfort or familiarity. In this trust, she discovers freedom. The freedom to walk away from what does not serve her without guilt. The freedom to welcome love without fear of losing herself in it. The freedom to create, to rest, to desire, to exist without explaining or justifying. She has become her own source of permission, her own source of belonging. And yet she knows the journey is ongoing. There will always be moments that test her, invitations to return to silence, opportunities to choose approval over authenticity. But now she carries a different question into these moments. Will my choice honor the woman I have fought to become? If the answer is no, she knows what to do. Because once a woman has truly reclaimed her voice, she understands that every time she silences herself for the comfort of others, she is not just betraying her present self, she is betraying the woman she has yet to become. And that she will no longer allow.